Good morning and welcome to Redemption Church. If this is your first time here, or if you are not on our mailing list or email list and want to be on that, there's a little blue card just out that door right on your left, and just fill out that blue card. You can drop it in the offering box on your way out just to get some updates that we do week in and week out. But we're just continuing our series this morning in the book of Esther, chapter 6, mostly 7. And we're going to talk this morning about the topic of God as being just. And this is kind of a topic, honestly, that if we really think about it, is a really kind of a tough topic of justice. I'm sure, like, as you probably hear this term, all kinds of things even go through your mind. And of course, from a human perspective, there's the court system. If you've gotten a speeding ticket or run through a red light or done something like that, you may have been a part of the court system. Right, and gone and had to sit in front of a judge and do all that whole thing and wait for your turn. I think I shared a while back, if you were here, I got a ticket for expired registration. So, it was one of those things where it wasn't like an accident, but like we had like engine trouble and the car wouldn't pass the inspection. So it was like one of the things I kept putting off, like I'll fix it this weekend. Something came up that weekend. I'll fix it next weekend. Something came up that weekend. I'll fix it next weekend. So I get pulled over in Kaysville for expired registration, and the cop he's really generous. He was really merciful to me, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and he gave me a warning and let me go. It's 4 months expired registration. So he says, just take care of it, get it done, and move on. Well, again, things happen, life's busy, so I put it off. All right, and I'm driving down Washington, 89, and I get pulled over. And I know for sure, I'm just like, I was shown mercy last time. This time I'm probably going to receive justice here. So this cop pulls me over, comes up, and she's like, yeah, you got expired registration. I said, yeah, I know. And I'm just going to be honest. And, maybe I'll get out of it again if I'm just really blunt level honest. And she's like, well, why? And I was like, well, things came up, and I meant to do it, and I honestly just didn't do it, didn't get to it. He's like, well, have you gotten pulled over this before? And this was like the week after I got the warning. Like, yeah, I did. When? Last week? You got a warning? Yeah. She's like, okay, I'm writing you a ticket. And I was like, okay. And I received justice. So I had to go to the court, and I get there, and I'm just thinking I'm just going to pay a fine, and the lady's like, oh, no, you got to go in the courtroom. So I get in the courtroom, watch a 30-minute video about legal proceedings, and it's talking about how, there's the felony and the misdemeanor, and I'm looking at jail time, and I'm like, I just had an expired registration. Am I going to go to jail? Do I need to call my lawyer? What's going on? Go before the judge, and the judge says, go pay it, and you're done. But anyways, I'm in this room, and it's just, there's this fear in me. I'm trembling. I'm like, what am I going to do? Telling Lindsay, hey, Linz, can you pick me up? I'm just down at the local jailhouse. Can you bail me out? And then all these thoughts are kind of running through my mind of just this court and justice. And if I went and got that ticket, or if I went to jail, or whatever the judge would do, where the law was, that was what I deserved. Because I broke the law. I had the expired registration. It wasn't the police officer's fault. It was my fault, right? I knew it. And even if I didn't know it, I still broke the law, even though I did know it. And so there's this whole justice thing. And you may have been pulled over before, or maybe you're going 10 over speed limit. And what do we usually do when those things happen? I can't believe that cop gave me a ticket today, right? I don't know if that thought's run across your mind. It's run across my mind before when I've gotten tickets for various things. But the truth is, when we break the law and we receive a punishment for it, that's just. That's fair. We break the law, we get the due penalty for that punishment. However, when we look at God, we kind of look at God, I think, a lot of times like we do that police officer who pulls us over going 10 over and just wouldn't cut us a break and just be like, surely God just cuts everybody breaks, and God wouldn't punish anybody. But if God is just, and justice is a good thing, why would that be the case, right? And again, we're going to dig into this further, but I just want to kind of get our minds thinking here about this theme of justice. And just imagine if and we were talking to this community group a couple weeks back, imagine if there was this judge and he let everybody just go free. Oh, you killed somebody, okay, go free. You killed somebody, okay, go free, go free, go free. What kind of judge would that be? It'd be a terrible judge. And if you were one of the family members in the room, and that was your loved one, that was the victim, that had gotten killed by that guy, even if you were thinking forgiveness for him, you would still probably want him to go to jail. Even on like thinking the best positive thoughts about that. But if that was me, I'm wanting justice. And just speaking 100% honest with you, that's where my heart goes. In fact, I'm thinking almost in my head, like, I'd want to enact justice myself, right? If I'm really honest here. Again, that's not, I understand as a Christian, and forgiveness is what we're after, but if someone is harming one of my loved ones, I want to see them punished. And that's why we see justice as a good thing. God being a just God is a good thing. And we recognize that. We know that. So why is it when we always talk about this whole deal about God punishing sin, it's just this weird, taboo, strange subject that we talk about God punishing sin or God punishing people for this? And the real issue is because we know we're guilty. Think about it. When you go before a judge and you're the guy in the hot seat, are you asking for justice? No, you're asking for mercy. You're like, Judge, please be merciful with me. Please let me go. I don't want to get this ticket. I don't want to pay this fine. Please let me go. Can you just write it off this one time? If you're in the courtroom, though, you're asking for justice. And the real issue, the reason why we have such a hard time with this is because we realize deep down that we're all guilty. And to the standard of God, we deserve punishment. We deserve his justice. And this is the beauty of the gospel, that God sent his only son, right? Fully man, fully God, takes on flesh. He absorbs our punishment on the cross. 100% just takes it on. And so when he takes on that punishment, he gives us his perfection. Her perfect righteousness is a free gift to those who believe and trust in him. So when we stand before God, the judge, one day, he's not going to say, let me see all the good and the bad, and let me judge. He's going to say, no, you've got the righteousness of my son, and you are counted free. Not because of what you've done, and not because God just let it slide. It was because justice was done, and justice was performed on Jesus for our behalf. Right? The wrath of God poured out on his son, right? For you and for me. And so that justice is satisfied, God is being both just and merciful to those who have believed in him, who have trusted in him. And so when we get into this, I guess the reason I'm kind of throwing this all out there about justice is because the end of Esther is a lot about justice. And it's just a topic that I really want to get thinking about and get us thinking about as we dig into this. Because honestly, if you haven't really given a lot of thought to that, this could be a really difficult subject to think about or talk about, or you just may have some weird thoughts there going on in your mind about justice. And just want to see that, make sure we understand justice is a good thing. So when we get into this, you kind of see the character and nature of God coming through. A little context on where we are in the story. Daniel preached a great sermon last week in Esther chapter 6. And Haman is the villain of the story. If you're trying to catch back up, Esther is this little orphan girl. And Israel doesn't have their own land. They're part of the Persian Empire, but they're no longer slaves, but they're citizens of the Persian Empire. But still, they don't have their own country. It's not like they have their own land. It's owned by Persia. And Esther is this little orphan girl. Her cousin Mordecai adopts her, raises her, and she goes into the king's harem. The king of Persia, the mighty, mighty king of Persia, goes into the king's harem as one of the many women in his harem, young virgin girl, probably very, very young. I would say, you think teenage girl, something like that. She goes with the king and does her thing and everything else like that and gets promoted to become queen of the kingdom. All this series of crazy events take place, and she is queen of the kingdom. Mordecai, her cousin, is a kind of in the court, possibly a court official, at least have some kind of familiarity with the court. And Mordecai hears about this plot to kill the king, to assassinate the king. Mordecai tells Esther, go tell the king that these two eunuchs are going to kill him. She tells the king's life is saved, the two guys are hung, they're killed instantly, boom, they're dead, right? And Mordecai gets no recognition, no support, no encouragement, no thanks, Mordecai, for saving my life. He gets absolutely nothing. Period of time goes by, probably around 5 years. You got Haman coming to power. Haman is the new second in command in Xerxes' kingdom. He oversees the affairs, oversees a lot of the day-to-day stuff. And again, you think Persia is such this massive kingdom. I mean, it's just so massive. And they don't have the speed of communication, everything else like that. So they have satraps who kind of govern the various provinces of the kingdom. And Xerxes depends on his guys, his court officials, to kind of make decisions every day. And he goes to them and he says, okay, what do you guys think? What do you guys think about this in economic policy? What do you guys think about this and this policy? And the eunuchs, court officials, will kind of make their recommendations, and Xerxes will say, sounds good, go with it. And you realize, like, throughout the story, Xerxes has depended upon these guys, and they've kind of created this whole mess that's happened. Well, anyways, the mess that came is Haman comes, and he's a descendant of Amalek. Amalek and Israel have not had a good history together. They're mortal enemies. I mean, way back when Moses is wandering around in the wilderness, the Amalekites are coming in and they're harassing the Israelites. They're going after them. They're attacking them. A lot of battles and skirmishes. And God says, you mess with my people enough. I'm going to wipe you off the planet. And he tells them that. King Saul, goes and he's supposed to fight the Amalekites. He's supposed to wipe them out. He doesn't. He spares them. King Agag is the king that he spares. Haman is a direct descendant of King Agag. The Bible says that he's an Agagite, and meaning he's a descendant of him and an Amalek. King Agag, if he was taken out like he was supposed to, justice was enacted, Saul doing what he was commanded to do, this whole situation wouldn't have happened. But Haman hates Jews. He hates Mordecai. Mordecai is one that he hates more than anybody else. Mordecai hates Haman. Mordecai doesn't bow and honor him, respect him, anything like that. Haman wants him dead. And not only does he want him dead, but he wants the whole Jewish race annihilated on one day. Mordecai goes to Esther and says, Esther, you've got to do something about this. She's like, I can't go before the king. If I go before the king, I'll die. And he says, you'll die anyways, because you're a Jewish descendant and you're going to be killed. So either you die here or you try to do something about it. So she gets the courage up. She goes for the king, talks to the king. But she doesn't come straight out and ask him, can you save my people? What does she do? She asks to go to have like a banquet with just her and Xerxes and Haman. We just want to have kind of like just a banquet. They go to the banquet. They have this banquet. Haman's sitting on cloud nine because he's like, the queen has asked me, along with the king, to come to this banquet. He goes home, and on the way home, he sees Mordecai. Mordecai is sitting in the street. He sees Haman. It's almost like you could picture it, like seeing Haman, Mordecai giving Haman like the evil eye, like I hate you. Just this hate coming from both of them. Haman is just, he has everything he could possibly imagine, but he can't make Mordecai stand up and honor him. And it just gets him to the bone of just absolute hatred that he's got towards Mordecai. He goes home to make himself feel better. He has this big party. He calls his friends over, his wife, and says, tell me how awesome I am. And they all talk about how his riches and his wealth and all his sons that he has and everything else. And then at the end of that party, he's kind of feeling good about himself, and then he's about to, but then his wife says, you just have Mordecai killed first. Just have him killed now. So Mordecai goes before the king. He's waiting in the king's court. And at that same time, before that, the king couldn't sleep that night. And that night, without sleeping, he has the book of the Chronicles read to him, and he hears about how Mordecai saved him and that he was not honored appropriately. So the king is like, we've got to do something, honor him. Who's sitting in the king's court right now, like waiting to talk to me? Oh, Haman is. Bring Haman in. King says, Haman, what would you do to honor somebody who really deserves to be honored? You know, how would you honor somebody well? Haman's like, well, I mean, I'm the best guy you've got here in the kingdom. You must want to honor me. And he's thinking this in his head. So he's like, oh man, put the king's robes on, let him sit on the king's horse, kind of go to town, do all these great things for him. I mean, of course. And he's thinking in his head, he's going to get all these privileges. And he's like, I want you, Haman, to perform all this stuff that you're talking about, but for Mordecai, his mortal enemy. The irony of just that he wants this to happen and for him, but instead he has to do it for his mortal enemy. It just kills him. He's in mourning because his pride is just eaten up and is killed. And here we are in Esther chapter 6, verse 14. Start down in verse 14. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. In chapter 7. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? Who has dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Again, this is the second feast with Haman and the king. The first one, the king Xerxes says to Esther, what's your wish, Queen Esther? And he says, that you would go one more banquet with me, have another banquet. Again, just think about the providence of God through all these different events. On the way home from that banquet is where Mordecai is laying in the street, and Haman runs across him. This is where Haman gets the plan to kill Mordecai. So he builds these gallows in his backyard. Another interesting conversation we had in community group and doing some research on this too as well. You know, when we think gallows, what comes in your mind, right? Is this kind of like you build the platform, probably an old Western movie, and they got the noose, and you put the noose around the guy's neck, and they put the trap, and the guy falls, and boom, he snaps his neck, and then he's dead. Well, this kind of gallows is not what the Persians did. The Persians had their own way of enacting fear into the hearts of people. You know, again, like Romans used crucifixion as a symbol to people. You don't mess with Rome. Persians would have these huge spikes. I mean, wooden spikes that go way up high. And they would just impale people on them. And so when they say you're hanging on them, their bodies are hanging on these big wooden spikes. So everybody kind of sees you don't mess with Persia and you don't mess with Xerxes. So this is how Haman wants to kill Mordecai. He wants to dishonor him. He wants to make sure that everybody knows how bad the Jews had it, right? And it's interesting when his wife Zeresh, Haman's wife Zeresh, in previous chapter in verse 13, she says, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. It's almost as if his wife recognized, whether it's the previous history of Amalek and Israel and all that had happened in between them and all how God had delivered them and how he had won all these mighty wars against them. It's almost like she's saying, it's all coming back again. This curse or whatever you want to call it, maybe it's their God, maybe it's this curse, I don't know. But he's Jewish. There's no way we're going to win. Something about that she recognized that they were powerless to stop. So anyways, the second feast, there's 2 days of feasting, and then they start the drunkenness again, right? It's like, Wine always, like, they'll be drinking wine for like 7 days. And here they're like starting for like 2-day wine drinking binge. And so they're starting to drink some wine. The king is relaxing. And he finally asks Esther what her request is, as Esther just waits patiently. Esther is kind of in a very precarious situation. You think about where Esther is and what she's doing. It wasn't just Haman who signed the order to kill all the Jews. He could only do that with the authority of the king. So the king also is the one who has decreed with his very own signet ring that the Jews would be annihilated. So if Esther is saying to the king, hey, I want to save my people, who has done this? Well, technically you did. It's kind of the thing you don't really say to a man who, again, going back to this whole pride thing, when he thinks he owns everything, you say that, he may have everybody annihilated anyway just because he's upset and offended. So she uses some tact, she uses some discernment there to kind of deal with this in the king. And so she starts talking about kind of like using this passive voice as she's talking. And in fact, look down into verse 3. First of all, she says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish. So she starts out by asking for her life. Now again, she hasn't identified being Jewish until this very moment, into the whole time that she's been in the court. So the king has no idea. First of all, we realize here that he's kind of forgotten about this decree that he made however long ago, because he probably just said, oh yeah, I'll do whatever, I'll do it. And then she says, let my life be granted me. And then she says, we have been sold, I and my people. She didn't say, you did. She said, we have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. And she even says, look, even if we were just sold into slavery, I wouldn't have come to you about this. But the fact that our whole people and myself are about to be killed, I felt like I should probably come to you about this. And the way that she phrases it is because it's going to be a loss to the king. Well, we see a loss to the king in a couple ways. One, because Esther is the queen. That's a big loss to the king. Also, Mordecai saves this plot, and the king has just remembered how Mordecai saved his life. So you're taking some of the most loyal people to the throne, and you're going to kill them. This is a great loss to the king. She uses a lot of tact, and she uses a lot of this almost like way that she deals with the king here is pretty amazing. Again, the king forgot the edict that he signed into action. The king seems to forget a lot. I don't know if he's just drinking too much wine. I don't know if he's just worrying about the kingdom or what's going on here, but he just seems to forget a lot. He also trusts his advisors and eunuchs an awful lot. And so it's just interesting here, and take a little side note, caveat. I'm just thinking of the way that Esther uses, with this wisdom and discernment in dealing with the king. And again, this isn't a prescriptive kind of way that we should deal with people in authority. But I think it's interesting to note how Esther does talk to the king. She uses respect. She is careful in the way that she says things. I think that we as believers in a world around us that is not always, with the gospel, is not always proposing the gospel, we should also be respectful of those around us. Again, it doesn't mean we shy away from truth. It doesn't mean that we shy away from what's right. But we should respect authority. Right? We see that even in the God has set up kings and kingdoms, and he has put those people into power and position. Doesn't mean we have to agree with them. Esther definitely didn't agree with the king here, but it does mean we should respect them. I think there's something about a believer when he has the mark of Jesus on his heart, that we have this respect for those in positions of authority just for the sake that that's where they are. It doesn't mean you necessarily will agree with all your political leaders, but we should respect them. We should pray for them. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I think it also in the way that we deal with the world around us is that there should be a real respect when we deal with those who even disagree with us. As we lovingly share the gospel message to people, we should show respect in that way as well. And I think that's interesting to see here with Esther. So Haman kind of sees this, the writing on the wall. He's terrified. For the first time in the book of Esther, Haman is just terrified. He's scared out of his mind. And let's jump down into verse 7. And the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. The king had shown wrath against this decree. I mean, of course, he saw this as you're taking my queen. You're taking, his most loved woman in his harem, right? You're taking her away from me. This is not a good thing. The king gets up and he goes to the palace garden, probably to think, what am I going to do? This is his second in command. This is his queen. He's angry. He's furious. What do you do about this? He goes to the palace garden to think. Haman stays behind, and the wording here is interesting. The only men who are allowed to be left alone with women of the harem were eunuchs. And again, those were men that had everything gone, if you know what I mean. So there was no really threat to them with the women of the harem. So here's these men. Here's Haman. He's staying behind, and he's not supposed to. In fact, you had to be within, even when you were in a room with one of the women of the harem, you had to be within 7 steps of that woman. So here is Haman, and he is not leaving the room. In fact, he is staying there. And what happens is Xerxes comes back in, right? And he comes back in, and what's Haman doing? He's begging for his life. He's begging so hard that he's like falling over the couch, just groveling, right? The king walks in, and it's kind of like one of those pictures where, Haman is not intending to harm Esther at this point, but what the king sees is Haman falling all over her. Well, it looks like he's trying to harm her in some way, and the king is just furious. He was wrathful before, but he's even more wrathful now. And now there's no stopping his wrath. And boom, Haman is now going to be killed. Cover his face. One of the eunuchs come to him and says, his name is Harbona, says, "Hey, you know what? Haman's got this gallows that he built in his backyard for Mordecai. Why don't we just put him on that thing? Put him on one of those spikes." Right? He goes in, and that's it. That's the end of Haman's life. Right? Justice being done to Haman. It's an interesting irony here. The king is listening to his advisors yet again. The advisors that, were the ones that kind of helped bring up this mess to begin with, and on and on and on. And he just constantly listens to all these people. And it's funny because this king is supposed to be, he was known as the God King. That was what people called him. And yet in all his power and everything that he knew nothing. Right? He's listening to these advisors who are telling him conflicted information, and he just goes with what they say. This is a normal human being. Weak, fallen, even though he's got all the power of the world just seemingly at his fingertips, he has nothing. He has absolutely nothing. He has no more knowledge, no more power really, because we see what happens when he goes and invades Greece, is that Greece shut him down, and he's wiped out of all his treasury and everything else. This is a man who thought he had everything. All the riches, all the women, all the armies, everything that he could possibly think he would have wanted, and none of it was worth a thing. I think a lot of times when we think about true power and real power and authority and riches and wealth, and we think all of that, if I could only get to this level, I'd have enough to take care of this or do this or that. And I just need more. Again, those things will never satisfy. If they didn't satisfy the king of Persia, they won't satisfy us today. And so if you're struggling and fighting for that next thing and you just can't get that peace, like if I just had that more, then I'd be peaceful, then I'd be happy, then I'd be content, you're never going to get there because those things do not satisfy you. And we talked a couple weeks ago, God being enough. Is God enough for you? God was not enough for Xerxes. Obviously, he thought himself to be God, struggling with his own issues there. But I think if we really dig down deep, I think that's what comes down to this whole issue of even God's justice. When we think that we're right, or we think we need this or we need that, who's God? We've made ourselves to be God. We've set ourselves up to be God in that position. We've elevated ourselves and we've lowered God. And now, again, that's just all in our head. It's on illusion. You can't really make God into a lower position. God is God. He created the whole universe. It's just something we do in our minds to make ourselves feel bigger about ourselves. But really, we are insignificant. And that's kind of the crazy thing about this whole thing. Here's Esther, right? Who would have thought this little orphan girl that God would bring up to turn the most powerful man in the world's head and save his people, a whole people. Right? God used her. And I think when we see the gospel even through the life of Esther, where we see in Esther, her life, she ate everything that was put before her. She didn't live by the Jewish dietary code. She did some questionable things ethically, and again, whether that was forced on her or whatever, I'm not getting into that because the Bible doesn't get into those things. But at the very best, I mean, we see just a very questionable life that she had. Here's God using her to do something amazing. And the power of the gospel is that no matter what you've done, no matter what life you've lived, right, you are not irredeemable. That it's nothing about you and it's nothing about me that God looks down and says, yes, you're good enough, let me save you. But he looks down at you and he looks down at me and says, you are a sinner and you deserve my justice and my wrath. But instead of me giving you my wrath, I'm going to save you and I'm going to redeem you, all the work of myself. And that's the beauty of the gospel. It's nothing that we do. It's all based on what Jesus has already done on the cross, right? Because God's justice was satisfied through Jesus. So much so that we can have eternity in life, in heaven forever, not based on anything that we do. And I think so many times we want to, we so bad want to think, well, surely I've got to be good enough. I've got to do enough good things so that God will be happy with what I've done. He's not. He's never going to do enough to make God just like, okay, you're good now. You're never going to get there. Because just like my ticket, when I talked about earlier on, when I had that expired registration, the only way I was going to get out of that, so to speak, is for me to fulfill my punishment. My punishment was me paying a fine. But if you have not followed Christ and placed your trust in Jesus Christ, and I'm not saying this to try to manipulate you or to scare you, but to be completely honest with you, if you don't place your trust in Jesus Christ, the wrath of God is eternity in hell. And that is real. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't say it, because it's not one of those things you go around and just say if you don't believe. But I believe that to be true. That only those who place their faith and trust in Jesus Christ will spend eternity in heaven and with him forever. It's not if you think you've been good, because we're not. We deserve justice, and that's the punishment. But if you believe in Jesus, that's what he suffered on the cross, is he faced that penalty, absorbed it 100% for you and for me because of his love for us. It's the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus' unconditional, sacrificial love for us is that he absorbed that wrath because he loved you and he loved me. Right? Not because of what we deserved. We didn't deserve a bit of it. He did that. And if you're here today and that's not you and you're thinking, oh man, I just don't know, you need mercy, you need grace, you need forgiveness, you need to turn to Jesus. All right? Even if you don't, you say, well, Bobby, I don't believe that. I don't believe that God will punish us like that or whatever. It doesn't matter really what you think or if we have a bunch of different opinions. What matters is what's real. Does that make sense? We can all think, I can imagine in my head all I want to. I got $10 million in my bank account, but all I got to do is turn on a bank statement and see what I've really got in there. And it's not $10 million, I promise you. No matter what we think about what God is or where we're going, our beliefs don't matter. It's what's real. What's really there. And if you're a follower and trust in Jesus Christ and have placed your faith in him and have turned to him, repented of your sins and believed in him, you'll be with him forever in eternity. That's what's real, right? And that's the hope we have as a believer as well. If you're a believer in the room, that's the hope that we have. Because when we go to heaven one day, we don't fear death anymore. Funerals are just so sad. It's so depressing. But as a believer, and you go to a funeral, and if you die, you're not afraid of that. You're not afraid of being in that casket because that's just your body. You're gonna be in heaven with Jesus. Right? We know what it's like. We see the end of the story. We see the new heavens and the new earth. We know what's coming, and we know that it's glorious. But that justice, right, is real. It's absolutely real, and it glorifies God. It's kind of hard to see what that justice is something that glorifies God, but it does. God's justice and timing is perfect. Right? Just think about this. What we deserve is to be wiped off the planet the minute we sin. Yet God gives us grace and lets us keep going. All right? Punishment is coming, but for those who don't believe, yet he gives us grace all throughout. God finishes what he promises. We see what happens with the Amalekites. And way back when, with Moses, and we're talking about this in community group, God finishes. He said he was going to wipe out the Amalekites, and he does. And we'll see that through the end of Esther. God's justice is perfect. It's hard, maybe even hard to understand, hard to wrap your mind around that, hard to look at some of those things, but it's true. We also see the consequences of sin and pride in Haman. Haman, his whole pride issues that he had early on, he didn't get wiped out right away. It all happened with the sleepless night the king had. And the king realizes, okay, Mordecai saved my life. Let's go honor him, right? And this whole thing happened. And Haman is thinking he's just about to get the decree to kill Mordecai, to finally finish him off. But that one sleepless night made all the difference, right? God is sovereign over it all. Consequences of reaping what you sow. We talked about this, me and Daniel, this week. Reaping what you sow, more than you sow, and later than you sow. Sometimes with sin, you think it's something that's manageable, it's something we can deal with. And I'm talking for this kind of the sense of just in sin in general, even as the consequences of sin, whether you're a believer or not believer. There are always consequences of those things, of those actions. Now we think if as a believer, there's no consequences in eternity for us because we know we are covered. But those things have all kinds of implications for us every day. Pride comes before the fall. Proverbs talks about that, a haughty spirit before destruction. Pride's always one of those things for us that we let fester and it destroys. It destroys CEOs, it destroys pastors, it destroys everybody. And so I don't know where you are today. I don't know if that's something that's just been on your heart. I don't know if you're in this room right now and you're not a believer and you're thinking, or maybe you're watching this online or you're thinking, I don't know Jesus. I don't know if I have that peace or that hope in Jesus Christ. I think what's coming to me is justice, God's justice, and I'm scared out of my mind. Well, again, I'm not trying to manipulate you, not trying to guilt you in anything. I just want you to know the truth, that if you turn to Jesus Christ, believe in him, repent of your sins, you can have eternity with Jesus forever. Or maybe you're a believer here today and you're just kind of struggling with kind of this whole idea of God being in control over the whole thing, or even how does God punish and should he punish and what happens there with all that. I just encourage you to go back to the scripture. See that justice is a part of the character and nature of God, and it's a good thing. Let's pray.